Our thoughts and prayers are with those suffering from the effects of Hurricane Florence, especially our neighbors in southern North Carolina. We know what it's like to be affected by hurricanes on the Outer Banks. It's not a quick recovery process. Those affected will be recovering throughout the year, possibly even longer. That's why Seaside Vacations is offering housing to victims through NCVRMA. We're also sending team members down to the New Bern area to help, and we're putting together a kayak fishing tournament along with Kitty Hawk Kites to raise funds for hurricane victims. If you're able, we ask that you help those in need by donating to the Foundation for the Carolinas Hurricane Florence Response Fund at www.fftc.org.
Welcome to the Outer Banks podcast, presented by Seaside Vacations. With nearly 400 hassle-free Outer Banks vacation rentals. Begin planning your Outer Banks beach escape today at OuterBanksVacations.com. Here's your host, Chad Fournier.
Hey guys, it's Chad Fournier from Seaside Vacations. We're doing a special Meet the Team edition of the Outer Banks podcast today because we had a lot of really cool, interesting people that work here with me at Seaside Vacations. My guest today is Vince Simansky. What is your official title here, Vince? I'm going to let you say it.
My official title is Supervisor for Pools and Spas.
All right, so if you come down for a vacation or rent a Seaside's vacation rental home, Vince is the one that makes sure your pool is sparkling and your hot tub is clean. Okay, so like I say, you're an interesting person, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. And I want to touch on something that you don't seem to like to talk about every time I bring it up, but I'm going to start the podcast with it. You used to be a lifeguard here on the Outer Banks.
Yes, I was a lifeguard here in 83 and 84.
It's so cool. So what was that like? What was that whole experience like back then? Obviously, you can't speak to today, but can you kind of go through some of the training, if you ever had to go out and save anyone, what kind of crazy stuff you saw when you were a lifeguard? Just tell us what that was like.
Well, I don't know if we have enough time for that.
Oh, we do.
Okay. Basically, at the time, you had to have lifeguard certification. At the time, I had WSI, which is Water Safety Instructor, which was the highest at the time that you could have. The lifeguards down here at the time we had some public, but most of them were what would be considered private. I worked for Lifeguard Beach Service. We actually rented umbrellas and chairs, and that's how we made our money. We actually didn't make our money as a lifeguard per se. The hotels, the bigger hotels who wanted lifeguard service, allowed us to put our equipment on their beaches so that they could advertise a lifeguard present, and we could make money with the larger or higher occupancy hotels.
That's crazy. So it was essentially you guys were like mercenary lifeguards.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, and the joke was if you went out to save somebody, they had to rent an umbrella and chair before you take them.
That's horrible and funny at the same time. So let me get this straight. There were not public lifeguards everywhere, or there were public lifeguards, and on these particular sections of beaches, they wanted to make sure they had their own as well?
There were a few public lifeguards, like the Nags Head Public Beach had one. The I'll call it the Collington Road, but it's Ocean Boulevard, was actually a public beach. And there were maybe a handful more, but there were not a whole lot of public beach guards. It was mostly Nags had their own guards that roved the beach in a Suburban or ATC at the time, the three-wheelers, and not a whole lot other than that. Like Corolla had no lifeguard service at all.
Wow. So it's nothing like it is today where there are lifeguards up and down the beach everywhere.
No.
So do you know when they started having the public lifeguards basically covering the whole Outer Banks? When did that start? I didn't even realize.
That was probably in the mid-'90s to late 90s. I know it was when I moved here in 2000, it was they were starting to get them pretty much at every public access.
That's interesting. I had no idea that wasn't a thing that's been here for years and years and years. That's a pretty recent development. You're talking, the 90s.
Yeah. So. Now, I think Nags Head pioneered it. Sandy Sanderson was in charge of the ocean rescue in Nags Head in the early 80s. And through that time, I think he retired two or 3 years ago at the most. And they had a presence on the beach, mostly driving up and down in the 80s. And then I'm guessing late 90s that they started the full service. I can't be sure on that one, though, because I was not involved.
That is really, I don't know, that's kind of mind-blowing to me, because the Outer Banks aren't exactly, light, happy waters all the time.
No, that's true. That's true. And at the time, when I was here, they would red flag the beach, but pretty much the red flags were mostly in Nags Head. Nags Head was Sandy Sanderson was the head of that, and they would red flag them. But we would have people want to argue with you. You know, I swim a mile a day at the pool and all that stuff. And you have to tell them, look, it's for your safety. Also, if you go in, you may be perfectly fine, but somebody seeing you go in may think, okay, everything's okay, and they go in and they're not capable of handling the waves and the currents. Yeah,
they're not as strong of a swimmer. Yeah, I went through that. I had family down over 4th of July week, and they went to the beach one day, and they were out there having a good time. And the next day was super windy, and the red flags were up. And they're like, we just went in there yesterday. It's like, trust me, you don't want to go in there. If the red flags are up, like, you don't want to risk it, you know?
Well, exactly. And you mentioned the winds. The winds basically control everything here. Northeast wind will bring in the heavier swell. Southwest wind will bring less swell, and will also blow the surface warm water out. Then you get the upwelling of the cold water. So that one day the water can be 75 degrees. The next day it can be 55 degrees.
Yeah.
And that's another question. How come the water's so cold? And it's, again, goes along with the wind.
So during your lifeguard days, did you have any rescues?
Yes, I had a few. My first rescue was a blind girl and her friend who were in a rip current and didn't know it. One of the things that's you see on TV, people are thrilled and happy that you save them, and they are to a degree, but most of the time they're just embarrassed.
Right.
Especially if you get them before they get to the point of panicking.
Right.
And in fact, the girl and her friend were very embarrassed that they had to be pulled in.
Yeah, because you got out there and got them before the trouble started, so they were probably like, what is going on?
Right, and I said, basically, you get out, they're being pulled out a little bit with the rip current. It's faster than you can swim, but it's not like you're flying, so if you look to your right or left, if you have no reference, you can't really tell that you're actually going out.
Right.
Unless somebody's standing on the sandbar to the right or the left of you, and then you can see that you are being pulled out. The time that you get in trouble is when you turn around, realize that, wow, I'm a lot farther than I thought, and you start swimming and you realize, okay, I'm not getting any closer.
So let's talk about rip currents. A lot of people just still don't understand rip currents. So can you explain those a little bit?
Basically, a rip current is caused by water going back out. Normally due to the low tide or the tide being pulled out. So you have 4 tides a day. It's a 26-and-a-half-hour cycle. Sorry, it's 26-hour cycle, so that it's not the same time every day. And depending on the wind, we can have low tides with no wind, and it's very little pull. The main problem happens when we have northeast winds that are pushing a lot of water, and you have a lot of water moving. As the tide turns from high to low, it starts to pull the water out. It's most defined or prevalent an hour before and an hour after low tide. As the water's being pulled out, it tries to find an area that allows it to move quicker or allows it to move. So you have areas on the bottom of the ocean. The ocean under the water is not flat. It has peaks and valleys. And what it does is it finds a valley, and it will start to pull in that area so that you can have a sandbar on either side of it where people are knee deep, and the rip current itself is waist to chest deep. And it looks like everything's safe until you get into it and you start getting pulled out. But it's mainly the water being pulled out. It finds a weak spot, which starts to channel, kind of like a river or like erosion, if you will. If you watched, if you had a slope and you poured water, and it found the lowest point and it started to run down there. So it's going faster than you can swim for the most part, and it's usually deeper, kind of takes your legs out from under you so you can't really stand that well. But if you move north or south, you end up in most times you end up on a sandbar and you can actually walk out. It's just you have to realize that you're in it, and the main thing is not to panic, and that's difficult because your first instinct is to want to swim back the way you came in and get back to shore, because that's safe and you're not worrying about being pulled out.
But you can't do that. You have to literally swim parallel to the shore.
Absolutely.
To go, so you're out of the rip current and then come back into shore.
Correct. You want to swim north or south parallel to the shore so that you either can stand up or you feel the pull reduce or dissipate completely, and then you can swim in.
So they're really hard to see. They're really hard to identify. I mean, they're easier if you're in a lifeguard chair or up like on a beach walkway. You can kind of get a better look at them. But when you're down ocean, right in the ocean, they're kind of hard to identify. Is there any tips you have for when you're down there to kind of give someone so they can be like, this is rip current, I should probably stay away from it?
Yes, and the first thing I would say when you get to the beach, don't just throw your towel down and run and jump in the water. Stand on the beach and watch the waves for at least 10 minutes. You'll find that to identify rip current, you'll find an area where there's no waves breaking. You'll see to the right or left the waves are breaking, but in the area of the rip current, there are no waves breaking. Sometimes you'll see a discoloration in the water where it's actually pulling the sand so fast, or it's moving that much water that it churns up the bottom. So you have a brown area north, or kind of a churned up, or churned up is the best way to put it. Area that is just looks different than north or south or right or left of it. You also see it almost looks not rough, but instead of having the regular wave pattern that you have with the waves coming in, you'll have kind of a jumbled, or waves that seem to be going different from different angles. It doesn't look the same.
Right.
You can also, if you have a lifeguard on the beach, most of them are familiar with that beach because they've been there for a few days, and they can tell you, okay, that's a rip current, or that's what you need to look for. Or if you see surfers on the beach, and most of the time if you watch a surfer come up to the beach, they don't just run into the water. They will stand there for a few minutes at least and watch the waves. And for surfers, they're actually looking for the rip current because it will take them out quicker and they don't have to fight through the waves.
It's like the expressway for them.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Well, and not to freak anyone out, because we do have, like we said, the beaches are guarded. If there is a heavy risk of rip currents, they're going to put the red flags up. They're not going to let you swim. You just need to abide by what the lifeguards say. And going back to what you said, if you're concerned, go ask a lifeguard. That's what they're there for. They're there to keep the beaches safe. And the beaches most of the time are safe, and there aren't rip currents that you have to deal with. It's just the people that are either ignoring the red flags that are up, or I find it rare that people are going to, on a nice day that's not red flagged, go out and get caught in a rip current. You know what I mean?
Yes, because they're on it. They know from the weather models and from the wind predictions when it's going to be the most when rip currents are going to be most prevalent.
And each lifeguard station has a little chalkboard where they give you the ocean conditions, and they'll tell you, what the rip current risk is. And, if there's nothing on there, you don't have to worry about it. Go out and have fun and, enjoy the ocean.
Absolutely.
So Any other cool lifeguard stories from that couple years that you did that?
The only other one I have would be shooting the pier at Jeanette's Pier with a drunk his wife in a raft.
Yes, please go into the details of this.
Well, you have some days where you've got surf and you have southwest wind. We don't have rafts like we used to have back in the early 80s. That sat 5 or 6 inches above the water itself. Mm-hmm. And with a southwest wind, it tends to blow them out so that you end up with people on rafts. They'll fall asleep or they'll not be paying attention, and the wind will actually blow them out to sea to some degree, 5 or 600 yards out. When we had 6-foot surf that day, and I was bummed because I couldn't surf. I was on duty, and I looked north. I was at the Armada at the time. It's now the Comfort Inn. Looked north and saw 5 or 6 rafts that were getting a little closer to the pier than they should have. So I took my buoy, ran down. I was able to get... Actually, it was 4. I was able to get the first 3 to take a wave in. I just grabbed the raft and I said, "Hey, guys, this is your wave," and let them take the wave in. But by the time I got to the last raft, we were a little too close to the pier. The southwest wind blowing put us on a course to go under the pier. And before I knew it, I was holding on to the raft. We were under the pier. The guy's wife she turned white immediately when she realized she was under the pier. The guy had a few to drink, so he didn't even really... Didn't faze him at all, so I had to push off a couple pilings so that we didn't crash or end up wrapped around them.
Right.
Got out on the north side of the pier. Didn't faze him. The woman was getting her senses back, and I said, "Look, I don't want to see either one of you in the water the rest of the day."
Right.
So I didn't see them again. And there was no thanks, no nothing. It was just like, okay, that was fun.
You've been mercenary lifeguard saved. Enjoy the rest of your trip. Wow.
And I think they were actually locals. I don't think they were.
Oh, okay.
They were vacationers.
Gotcha. So you brought up you do surf. You are a local surfer. We have actually a really cool surf video from you on our YouTube page. You were just out. It looked like you were having the most chill surfing day ever. You just looked like you were having a blast. But kind of explain the surfing on the Outer Banks, because it's pretty good. Just kind of go into the Outer Banks as far as the surf spot.
Well, the Outer Banks, you can have surf in one spot, and then 200 yards or 100 yards down the beach, there's no surf. Mm-hmm. It just depends on, like I said, the bottom contour is not flat. So you look for areas where you have sandbars so that you get, the waves will break more often in that area. And normally you'll have waves, you're looking for tides again. So towards low tide with the incoming tide, you've got water coming in and you have the water depth proper so that you can get good waves. What the ultimate is to have, say, a low pressure system off the coast that is causing long period waves, and then have a light west wind, which will clean up the face of the wave. So that's the ultimate what you're looking for here. And most of the time in the summer we have the smaller surf, which is great to learn on, and it's fun to swim in, and everybody has a good time in it. The best waves are fall and winter and sometimes spring. Again, it just depends on if we have a good low pressure system that's off the coast, not on the coast, because then we get the strong northeast wind. But if it's off the coast, it produces waves for us. And again, you can have the better waves are normally down south across the bridge, across the Bonner Bridge, on Pea Island and down towards the lighthouse in Hatteras. Rodanthe usually has some really steep waves that go from deep to shallow quickly, and they jack up, and you get a lot of the tube riding is more in that area, but you can tube ride anywhere. I would be considered an old school surfer, as you said, more laid back. I'm not doing any airs. Of course, I'm 56 now, so I don't do any of that anymore.
Right.
But there are people who do and still can. But me, I'm more of a longboard or a kind of smooth down the line surfer. I started surfing in 75, learned how to surf here. I learned on my own. Would have been better had I had somebody teach me. I wouldn't have got as beat up or bruised.
Well, and speaking of that, you do, if you rent vacation rental through Seaside Vacations, we have what we call Club Seaside, where we've teamed up with local businesses all across the Outer Banks to get our guests discounts. And Farm Dog Surf School is the ones we use for surf lessons. So you can, if you rent through us, you can get a discount for Farm Dog Surf School. And those guys are super nice, super cool, really patient with teaching people how to surf. So now that my ad's out of the way, continue.
Well, just to add to that, the Farm Dog guys know their stuff. And if you have any questions about the ocean, marine life, rip currents, whatever, they'll definitely be able to point you in the right direction. And they're very informative. They know their stuff, and they're gonna take you out on a day where you're gonna learn.
Right.
To learn on a day that's choppy or overhead surf is not the time you want to learn.
Right.
And they'll take you out when you can actually learn, and that's the fun part. It's disappointing when you go out to learn and the wave condition just isn't right for you. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the main reasons to get somebody to guide you, teach you. Because like I said, when I first started surfing, I had the wrong board. It was too narrow, and it was difficult to learn.
Gotcha.
Then I got a 8-foot wide longboard. Stood up on it immediately, and I was so excited that I stood up on it that I rode the board all the way into the beach and broke it in half.
Oh, no.
So, yeah.
Well, and I was going to ask you how, the sandbars down here factor into the surfing for, like, people that are just learning to surf. Obviously, you don't want to bail on a sandbar because you could break your neck.
Exactly, and that's something you would learn with the surf school. If it's shallow, a lot of times you're falling off, or the wave dies in ankle deep, knee deep water. Mm-hmm. So you want to fall off, kind of like just falling backwards.
Gotcha.
And land on your backside. You don't necessarily want to do a back flop, but it's much better than jumping off and jamming your knee or tearing up your ankle or something like that.
Right.
And definitely not diving off, because if you dive off, like you said, neck injuries or worse.
Another thing that you're into, which I find very interesting, is this whole dune buggy thing on the Outer Banks. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I've been interested in dune buggies, surfing and so on, for a while. My wife allowed me to get one in 2008. I restored it, and that kind of started the whole thing. The fact that we can still drive on the beach here up in the northern Kerala area makes it so that you can actually use the dune buggy kind of for what it was
designed for. Yeah. Right.
But there are plenty of people all over the country and worldwide who drive them, who've never driven them on the beach or even off-road. They just drive them on the street. They're just a blast. It's a convertible that's sparkly or shiny or whatever, and it's just a lot of fun.
Gotcha. So another plug for our club Seaside. Our partner is Bugging Out, where you can rent dune buggies and for your Outer Banks vacation. Another fun. There's so many fun experiences to have down here.
Absolutely.
I feel like you need to have 10 years worth of vacations to get close to experiencing everything on the Outer Banks. Going on the dune buggy thing, continuing on, you want to tell people about the Manx on the Banks coming up October 8th, and it's in conjunction with what was the Mustang Music Festival, but has kind of switched to the Mustang Rock and Roast is what it is this year. So it's a little different, but you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we have, in 2011, I started Manx on the Banks. It's a gathering of the Manx Club. Bruce Myers came up with the Myers Manx Dune Buggy in 64. He's still around. He's 92, but in good shape. He'll be here again this year. And this year, Scott Jackal, also an employee here at Seaside, wanted to benefit the wild horses, because a lot of the people who come here for our event want to see the wild horses in their dune buggies while they're driving around. And there are plenty of people who come here on vacation who want to see the wild horses. So we've gotten together, and we're going to have our show and shine on the 13th in Kerala at Monterey Plaza. And right after that is the Mustang Music Festival. or
It's the Mustang Rock and Roast
yes,
this year.
the Mustang Rock and Roast will be after this event, but we'll have all the dune buggies. Looks like we're going to have about 75
Wow.
up in Monterey Plaza.
Very cool. And I'm sure they'll all be taking rides up and down the beach at some point with those.
Yeah,
while they're out
after that, we're going to go up on the beach and should have a lot of fun. Now we do it. We're though they are called dune buggies, we don't drive around in the dunes. The dunes are something you want to protect.
Yes.
We want to keep our relations with the sheriff and the locals a good one, so that we make sure that our guys are very responsible while they're driving on the beach.
Yeah. I mean, that's another good point to bring up. That, if you're not familiar, the dunes are there to stop the ocean from going onto the Outer Banks. So we want to preserve those as much as possible. That's why we ask people not to run up and down them and just stay off them and don't climb on them. And we want as much seagrass to grow on them as possible, so they just kind of stay there and do their job. So if you come down for vacation in Outer Banks, please stay off the dunes.
Yeah, there are plenty of walkways. Any of the oceanfront houses have walkways that go over the dune. Use the walkways. Same thing with the public access. There's walkways to go over the dunes, so there's no need to climb the dunes.
Yeah. That's one thing I feel like on the Outer Banks. I feel like every rule that you see is there for a pretty good reason. There's not a lot of rules just because to have a rule. I feel
Right.
like it's a pretty open, free place, but if there's a rule, there's usually a good purpose behind it.
Yeah, that's what I found as well, and it's to keep the area as nice and pristine for the rest of our lives or in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Is there any other cool stuff you do that I don't know about that we haven't talked about before yet? Because I feel like there's something else in there that you've done Outer Banks wise that is kind of interesting.
I don't know. I restore dune buggies here. I shape surfboards here.
There we go. Talk about shaping surfboards. I knew there was something else in there. So how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that since 2005.
Wow. How'd you get into that?
Well, I wanted to. A friend of mine said, "Hey, do you want to shape a surfboard?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be great." Because when I was a kid, I thought that I would work in a surf shop, make surfboards, lifeguard, and surf all the time. And found out that you need to pay bills some
Right.
way. And that never happened. But I figured in my later life, since I'm living here, if somebody's going to teach me, I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
So I picked up a blank, got a planer, and started shaping. And I do vinyl lettering. To live here on the Outer Banks, sometimes you have to do more than one thing. So you
Yeah.
end up learning a lot of things. So I got a vinyl cutter and started making decals for some of the surf shops and some of the guys who do shaping and glassing. And that's how I got in with Gale Force Glass and Rasco over there and Murray. And they showed me a few things on glassing surfboards, and Ted Kearns at the time back then showed me a bit about shaping. They did laugh at my first surfboard, which is I still have it, and it's unique. Let's just put it that way.
Well, you have to start somewhere.
Absolutely, and it surfs fine.
Okay.
It surfs fine, so that it's not going to win any beauty contests, but it did the job. So I started shaping and learned some stuff with that, and it's also a less expensive way to get a surfboard.
Yep. There you go. Just make your own.
Yep.
That's awesome. Very cool. So do you sell a bunch of them then, or?
I've shaped and glassed 65.
Okay.
And I think I still have 4 of them. So I've sold all the others.
See, it's very cool. So your Seaside Vacations man that makes sure your pool is sparkling and your hot tub is bubbly does all this other stuff as well. That's what I love about this company. I mean, we have a lot of really unique, interesting people that work here. And I didn't want to make this about pools and hot tubs and what you do. But that being said, is there anything you want to talk about regarding that?
The pools and spas, the only thing I would say is, enjoy them. We do expect to see sand. It's going to happen. You're in the water or you're walking. So, you don't have to apologize that you got sand in the pool. because I have that when I go, oh, sorry, we got sand. It's like, hey, you're on vacation. Enjoy yourselves.
Yeah.
That's what you're here for.
And you're good at getting that out.
Yes, absolutely. We have vacuums, and our guys come by before the guest checks in and during the middle of the week to make sure everything's good so that they're safe and the water's clean for them.
So have you ever thought about going kiddie pool style and putting a bucket outside of the spa? Like when you rinse the grass off your feet?
Well, yeah, I've thought about that. But a lot of times...
Can you imagine?
I have seen that a couple times with
Really?
the kiddie pool, yeah. But most of the time, most of the houses do have a shower or
Right.
a foot wash
Right.
on the way back from the beach.
Yeah.
So that the guests can use that to their benefit.
That's a little more adult way to go.
Yeah. Not quite as much fun.
Not quite as much fun as stepping in the bucket. Right, for sure.
Right, or the kiddie pool. I have seen big kiddie pools used for that.
Actually, that's a good idea. Like a big kiddie pool that you just step through before you go in. Huh. Didn't think about that. Vince Simansky, Seaside Vacations team member, we're happy to have you with us, and I appreciate you coming in to talk to us about all the cool things that you do on the Outer Banks. If people want more information about Manx on the Banks, where can they go?
Go to our Manx on the Banks Facebook page.
Okay.
And join, and we'll be posting a lot of pictures from what we're doing. There's also some scheduling, what the week's events will be, because we'll be going to the lighthouse. We'll be Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. We have a trip to there. We have a trip to Pettigrew State Park. We have a trip to the Airplane Museum in Pungo, which is actually pretty cool. It's a privately held, mostly World War II airplanes that I think 90 to 95% of them are flyable. So they're going to put out a Corsair or a P-51 Mustang for us to take pictures of our dune buggies in front of.
Very cool. So you guys go all over the place with the buggies, and you trailer up, I assume, and then go drive them once you get to your
we'll drive them. We have
You'll
people,
drive them the whole way to the...
We'll drive them the whole way. And we have
so
people,
you road trip in them.
Yes.
That's awesome.
We have people who will be driving in from Canada, people who will be driving in from California in their buggies for this event.
So, I mean, most of the ways you get around the country is on the interstate. You guys take them on the interstate then?
Oh, yeah. I've had mine 85 miles an hour.
Oh, man, that's so cool. So the question that pops in my mind then is, how do you guys handle rain?
I have a soft top.
Okay.
Most people have soft tops if they're going to do that kind of driving, or
Gotcha.
a hard top with side curtains like you'd have in a boat.
Gotcha. Oh, man, that's so cool. So, yeah, it's a whole trip thing. That's very cool. Well, Vince, I appreciate you coming in and talking to us. I will put the information for Manx on the Banks in the show notes. And until next time, thanks for listening to the Outer Banks podcast.